Once upon a time, I was in Albania. So as you might have guessed, this story begins in Albania. And more specifically, it begins when I drop something off the 6th floor apartment balcony down to the 2nd floor apartment balcony, which sticks out just a little bit further than ours. To explain my thought process for how I was going to go and get this thing, I have to teach you a little bit about the Albanian housing market. This is a shot of the hill just behind our apartment building, and you can see that there are a mix of very beautiful resort-style apartment buildings. There's a mix of kind of humble, not-so-glamorous apartment buildings, and then right next to those, you get buildings that are just downright communist-era ugly. And there you get this weird mix of these 3 apartment buildings, and all the apartment buildings in this area of Albania fall into one of those 3 categories, and our apartment building is no exception. It falls more into the ugly communist era, concrete bunker kind of apartment building. Most of the paint is peeling, there's exposed plumbing and electrical work. The elevator is creepy as all get out and has one of those horror movie opening sounds. And most of the apartment buildings are just downright abandoned or empty. So my first thought was to go and knock on the neighbor's door and see if they'd let me out on their balcony, but since most of the building's empty and I'm the only occupant as far as I can tell, I was going to have to be creative about finding a way to break into the patio below. And so I had to go outside and scout around and see what alternative options I had for accessing this patio. I even tried going into the apartment building across from ours where I could get a better view. And luckily for me, I noticed that outside of a stairwell in our apartment building, there is a little column that you can drop down onto a different balcony, not the same balcony, but I could walk my way across the different balconies if all of these apartment buildings were empty and finally make my way to the patio where I dropped my item. And so that's exactly what I did. Please note, everything in the following shots is a recreation. For artistic representation, I've put on sunglasses to reflect how cool I felt in the moment. And luckily, this was a huge success. It totally worked. I found the object that I needed, and I was making my way back to go up through the way that I came. But I realized all of these apartment buildings were empty, and most of the doors were unlocked and open. There was one that had, a large amount of black mold, but 2, it looked like it had the original building plans on the wall. It had a whole bunch of spare parts for plumbing and electrical and, just other building equipment that were inside. But sitting kind of in the corner on top of a bidet was a black briefcase. And what was inside was this old manual typewriter. Now, I just recently got into restoring old typewriters, and so I was dying to get my hands on it to do some research and figure out where this typewriter came from and what the history is behind it. So it turns out that this typewriter is a Model 173 President 1700 Profi East German typewriter that was made about 1989 based on the serial number. And that's a really interesting piece of history because it turns out 1989 is the exact same year that the Berlin Wall fell in East Germany. So the question that you might be asking yourself, and the question I was asking when I found this typewriter was, what's an East German typewriter doing in Albania of all places? And it turns out the answer to that question is pretty simple. It's just that Albania was a communist state up until 1991-ish, just like East Germany was. But the question that I think is even more interesting is, what was Albania doing in 1990 buying manual typewriters from East Germany? And what was East Germany doing making them? When I think of the 90s and leading up to the 90s, I think of the dawn of the internet age and the personal home computer.
DataQuest analysts say price ranks as the top consideration for buyers considering a home computer. But they say users also want a machine that can run business-type programs like a word processor and a spreadsheet, in addition to playing games and offering educational opportunities for their children.
And so the typewriter, which is manual and doesn't plug in, just seems kind of out of place. So I asked my parents, I said, let me know if I've got this wrong, but when did you guys get your first computers? Well, it turns out my mom's family had a personal home desktop in 1990 while she was in high school. And then my dad, this is even crazier, my dad had...
Atari brings the computer age home. With Atari home computers, anything's possible. In fact, they just might be the wisest investment you'll ever make.
Told you she's smart.
Atari home computers. We brought the computer age home.
At 9 or 10 years old, had a personal computer. And this was 10 years before that typewriter was manufactured. Probably 11 or 12 years before it even made it to Albania. And so it just goes to show you how crazy behind Albania was when it came to the internet age. So the next question is, why was Albania so far behind? It's really easy to answer the question, why was Albania and East Germany so far behind? And it's just, they're communist states, We've heard a lot about how debilitating socialism and communism is. But I like Albania and the story behind it because I found a piece of history that I can tie it to. Physical history that kind of represents the zeitgeist of the era for Albania. And this is it. This is a bunker. It's one of 175,000 bunkers just like it that were developed under the Socialist Republic of Albania and their socialist leader, who saw all of these communist countries falling apart under, pressure from the Western world, and decided, out of kind of a feeling of paranoia, that they needed to defend themselves with this mass bunkerization project. From the year 1968, for 20 years they built these. 20 years, from 1968 to 1988. That stands in really stark contrast to what was going on in the U.S.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
When my mom finally got a family home personal computer, when my dad had already been playing with the computer for 5+ years, all Albania had to show for it were these stupid bunkers that were never even used. And they're still here, just rotting. This one's been preserved because they've got a sign over here I want to show you. This shelter was built in 1975 during communism period and weighs 400 tons. It represents the past of our country during the communism. And so this represents a lot, not just to me, but to the Albanian people of, this is what communism is. This is why they're behind. So I think that's really interesting.